Hello everyone, in today's video I begin the 1/25th scale 2010 Ford Shelby GT500 build. This project uses the 3D printed FFR SC1 chassis that I built in a previous video. Since the chassis is now complete and ready for the electronics and body to be mounted, I can now begin building the car. I've divided this build up into 3 videos. The first part, which is this video here, covers modifying the model kit's parts to fit the chassis, making the body mounts, and mounting the electronics. The second video will cover wiring the electronics and painting. And the third video will cover the final assembly and test drive. I'll also be releasing a shorter, more condensed full build video at the end, which will show the entire build from printer to peeling rubber. This is just a slightly different way to present the content that I want to try out, and hopefully all of you will enjoy. I'll be going into a lot of detail in each part of the build, so hopefully any of you who are following along can learn from it and get some ideas. Now, if you don't want to wait for each part of this build series to be released, the full build video is available to all Patreon supporters and members of this channel. You'll not only get to binge watch the entire build all at once, but you'll also be helping to support the channel and make more videos like this possible. So with all that said, let's get started. Here's a look at where we left off in the previous video. The chassis is fully assembled and fits the body perfectly, though we will still need to install some electronics before we can drive the car. To get started, I thought I'd go ahead and quickly show you the model kit that I'll be using. I already showed the unboxing in the previous video where I assembled the chassis, but I wanted to quickly show all of the parts that are included once again. This is a Revell 1/25th scale Ford Shelby GT500 model kit, which will fit perfectly on the 3D printable FFR SC1 chassis that I built in the previous video. Other similar Revell Ford Mustang model kits will also work with this chassis. All of the parts in this kit look really nicely molded and have some great detail. There are very few mold lines, flashing, or any other imperfections. The shape and proportions of the body look spot on, and all of the parts fit together without any issues. Although many of these parts will go unused with this build, I'm sure a lot of them will come in handy for future projects or dioramas. An all-around great-looking kit that I was really looking forward to putting together. Although this FFR SC1 chassis has the correct wheelbase and width to fit this body, I do still need to do some work to get the body and interior to fit on the chassis. This car is going to be a driver, so although I do want the car to have some great scale details and a realistic appearance, I don't want to have to sacrifice performance and ease of maintenance. This is something important to think about when planning your build. This car is also inevitably going to get some scratches and wear with use, so I don't want to invest a ton of time trying to make every little detail of the car perfect, like I might try to do with a static model. Additionally, I think keeping things simple with this build will be beneficial to all of you who are building one of these cars along with me. Of course, keep in mind that there are multiple different ways to go about the build, and you might want to add more detail to your car than what I'll be doing here, so definitely feel free to do so. Don't think that the way I'm building my car here is the best or only way to do it. You might also want to reference some of my previous builds for more ideas and inspiration. I always start out by doing a lot of brainstorming and try to come up with an idea of how I'm going to fit all of the electronics and the interior together on the chassis. I had a look at all the parts trees and cut off all the parts that I thought I might use for this build, such as the interior parts, grille, and windows. After that, I began test fitting the interior and started to figure out what modifications were going to be needed. I decided I was going to once again go with a shallow tub interior similar to what I did on the Dodge Challenger and Mazda RX-7 builds previously. Although a shallow tub interior is not the most scale-looking option, it allows plenty of room directly below the interior for the electronics to be easily mounted. It's also very easy to simply cut the floor out of a stock interior tub and make a new floor higher up using a flat sheet of styrene. The sides of the interior are separate from the rest of the interior rather than the one-piece tub like many other kits use. This is great as it allows a lot of detail to be added to these sections, such as the great-looking door panels, but I have been finding it easier to glue the side pieces into place before doing any cutting. I used plenty of super glue to secure each side piece. As you can probably tell, I'm going to have to do some serious hacking to get the interior to fit low enough. The inner fender sections are molded as a part of the interior. At first I wanted to try to keep these sections, and although I do think it's possible, I later cut those sections off entirely just to allow more room for the front suspension and wheels. At this point, I wanted to start figuring out where I was going to place each of the electronics. The ESC I'm using is the one included with the FFR SC1 electronics kit that we offer. The receiver I'm using is a Radiolink R6FG receiver paired with a RC4G transmitter, and I'm using a micro 2S 300 mAh LiPo battery. Links to these products and more information is below in the description. I just look to see what areas of the interior will need to be removed, then I make some rough marks before cutting off these sections. To do the rough cuts, I like to use a hot knife as it cuts effortlessly through the plastic. At this point, it's just a matter of gradually seeing where material needs to be removed and removing it. Again, at this point in the build, I still wasn't sure whether or not I would keep the front inner fender sections and the full depth interior, so that's why I'm not just immediately cutting these sections off. It was after some time spent cutting and test fitting that I realized in order to achieve the balance of scale realism and ease of maintenance that I wanted, I was going to need to remove much more of the interior. Of course, it's always best to be gradual with this process, since it's a lot easier to cut more material off than it is to add some back. Here's where I start to mount the electronics to the chassis. You can see that I removed the receiver and ESC from the case, so that they won't take up as much room. Once I figured out where I would place each, I used double-sided tape to secure them to the chassis. This is where I ended up placing the receiver and ESC. The battery will go in the rear. But of course, with the electronics now being where they are, there's no way I could keep a full depth interior, so I had to do some serious cutting. Once the sides of the interior were high enough so that they would be above the electronics, I began sanding the bottom so that it was flat. I then cut a piece of styrene sheet that will become the new floor. With the bottom flat and level, I glued the styrene floor into place. After the glue dried, I cut off the excess. As you can see here, I needed to cut some sections of the floor so that it would fit over top of the electronics and the wires would have some room. I also needed to sand away some material from the back to leave as much room for the rear wheels as possible. It was at this point here where I realized I was going to need to do a lot of work to the inner fender sections. I tried to sand away as much material as possible, along with spacing out the front wheels using 4x1mm hex wheel mounts, but in the end I chose to just cut them off. There just wasn't much left of them by that point, and they were limiting the steering angle. Here I'm installing the dash. I did need to remove a little material from the bottom to get it to fit with the new higher floor. Next, I moved on to building the seats. They of course will need to be cut shorter, but before doing that, I glued the backs to the seats. I just eyeballed the height and cut them down to that size. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to fit much of the rear seat without it looking awkward. I glued what was left of each seat to the interior. I used some thick shoe goo for the front seats, which allowed me to adjust their position. It may not be a full depth interior, but it will still look nice. With the interior at this stage of completion, I started working on the body mounts. I'll be using magnets just like I did for the Challenger and RX-7 builds previously. I cut some sections of styrene tubing that I'll glue magnets to one end and the chassis to the other. Here I glued a small piece of styrene to this section here so that I'll have a flat surface to glue one of the magnets to. I found a place to glue each styrene tube to the chassis and secured them using super glue. I'll be using these rare earth magnets to hold the body in place, but first I needed to remove a little material from the mounts to get the body to sit level and at the right height that I wanted. Before gluing the magnets, I place a piece of paper between each so the magnets don't get glued together. I then glue the bottom magnet to the chassis and the top magnet to the body. I was hoping just 3 magnets would be sufficient to hold on the body, but it was clear I needed to add a 4th. With the 4th magnet in place, the body was being held on much more securely. At this point, the interior and body has been modified to fit the chassis, and magnetic body mounts have been installed. Additionally, the ESC and receiver have been mounted to the chassis. I'm now ready to wire all of the electronics and begin painting the car, which I'll be showing in next week's video. If you don't want to wait that long, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the button below or becoming a member on Patreon with the link in the description to see the full build. Your support is greatly appreciated and helps make more content like this possible, plus you'll get access to some additional perks as well. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and remember part 2 goes live at 4 p.m. Eastern Time next Friday the 17th. Before I end this video, I want to showcase some of the awesome vehicles and projects that have been showcased over on the Make It RC Facebook group. The link, as always, is below in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the 2010 Shelby GT500 build. Last week I modified the body and interior to fit the FFR SC1 chassis, made some custom body mounts, as well as secured the ESC and receiver to the chassis. In this video I'll be getting the electronics wired and making sure everything is working as it should. I'll then be painting the car and applying the decals. If you're new to this build series, I recommend that you take a look at the playlist linked below in the description and start from the beginning. You'll learn more about this project and the products used. For everyone else, this project should need no further introduction, so let's get started. The electronics kit available for the FFR SC1 chassis includes the JST plug I'll be soldering to the motor. Make sure the red wire goes to the positive tab of the motor marked with a plus symbol. It's easier to do with the motor out of the car, but with everything already together, I carefully did it with the motor installed. I can now plug the motor into the ESC and plug the steering servo into the receiver using the servo adapter cable. I do my best to tidy up the wires with some small zip ties. I especially make sure that no wires will come into contact with any moving parts. With the battery plugged in, I turn on the car for the first time, though I quickly noticed that the car didn't want to stay on. I cut too much material off of the switch, which contained a spring, which applied pressure to the switch and kept the car on. Learn from my mistake here and don't cut that switch more than maybe just a little bit off the end. For now, a piece of tape will keep the switch in the on position. After binding the receiver to the transmitter, the car was functioning great. I did a little more tidying up to get the interior and body to sit perfectly on the chassis. I adjusted the steering dual rate, which limits how far the wheels can steer so they won't rub. I like to use a little water washable glue to prevent the wheel nuts from coming loose. I couldn't resist taking the car for a quick test drive. The car drives great, no issues and no wheel rub. Here's how the car looks so far. Back on the bench, I separated each part of the body and began removing any imperfections, starting with side cutters and a hobby knife, then moving on to sandpaper and sanding sticks. This kit comes out of the box looking great, so not a whole lot of work is needed. I did make sure to test fit every part, such as the grille and side view mirrors, to make sure that they all fit. Everything fit together well with very little work being needed. I decided I would glue the dash into place now, since I will be painting the whole interior as one piece. This might result in certain areas getting more paint than others, but it's not going to be very visible, so I'm not too concerned about that. It probably wasn't necessary, but I did mask off the magnets. After a little work on the steering wheel, I was ready to paint the interior matte black. While those parts were drying, I went back to working on the body. The only thing left to do was a little wet sanding so the primer would adhere well to the plastic. I then washed the body and let it dry. While drying, I moved on to the wheels and tailpipe pieces. They turned out looking pretty nice, though I still did some sanding to each to smooth out the 3D printed layers. I taped them all to some popsicle sticks to make them easy to paint, and applied several coats of primer. By this time, all the body parts were dry, and I glued the front and rear bumpers to the rest of the body. The primer made the surface of the wheels and tailpipe smooth. I slightly modified the tailpipe pieces so that they would fit, then sanded each part. I used chrome paint for the tailpipes and outer rim, and gloss black for the wheel centers. I also put a second coat of paint on the interior. I used the same matte black paint for the front grille pieces. The paint on the interior turned out looking great. I'm really impressed with how well the bumpers lined up with the rest of the body, though I still did a little sanding in a few spots. I also deepened all the panel gaps. I cleaned off the dust and applied a few light coats of primer. Here's a look at everything so far. I used 600 grit sandpaper to sand the primer, getting it ready for paint. After posting polls for what color I should paint the car, the winner ended up being dark blue. I always start by painting the inside of the body and any hard to reach areas before applying paint to the outside. I did my best to apply light coats and get the paint as smooth as possible. Although it's not perfect, I was happy with how it turned out. I didn't want to sand the paint, but I did rub in some polish. It doesn't smooth the paint as much, but it's less trouble and I don't have to worry about sanding through the paint. I thoroughly washed the body after applying the polish. Now for some reason I decided to go ahead and start masking portions of the car that I wanted painted black. What I should have done was apply the decals and then apply the clear coat and then paint these sections so that they would be more of a flat color. However, in the end, it worked out, as you'll see, but I wanted to mention that if I was to do this again, I'd wait to paint those details. I did the best I could with masking and then lightly airbrushed on the paint. The result turned out looking great so far, so I repeated the masking and painted all the weather stripping around the windows. I next painted a few black details on the spoiler and the side view mirrors. At this point, I was ready to apply the water slide decals. I'll be using the white stripes on this car. There are a ton of water slide decals to apply on this body, and despite not being the best at applying them, I did the best I could, and the final result turned out looking pretty nice. Using microset and microsole solutions was extremely helpful. I'm not sure how well I could have applied the decals without them. I installed the rear spoiler before applying the rear stripes. I also cut the stripes between the spoiler and trunk, since obviously they wouldn't bridge the gap with the stripes on the full-size cars. Again, this was a pretty time-consuming and difficult process for me, but I think in the end the stripes looked pretty good. After the stripes, I continued to apply other decals, including the center brake light and side marker lights. There were a few spots on the trim and weather stripping that I wanted to carefully touch up with some black paint. At this point, I was ready to apply the clear coat. Like I said before, if I was to do it again, I'd probably apply the decals before the clear coat, and then paint the black trim after the clear dries. Putting the clear coat over the flat black paint made it appear glossy, which I still think looks good. Maybe the owner is just a little obsessed with Armor All. Again, the clear isn't perfect, but I'm really pleased with how it turned out. It's pretty thick, so hopefully it doesn't scratch too easy. I once again did a little quick polishing. I noticed that there are some body lines on the roof that are black on the full-size cars, so I masked off this area and painted it. With the body looking good, I moved on to painting the outer edges of each window black. I carefully marked and cut out the center section that I wanted to remain transparent, and then painted the outer edge. There is a tiny ridge molded into the windows, which makes it a little easier to tell where to make the cut. I used Tamiya Smoke to paint around the outer edge. While those dry, I sanded and painted this sun visor piece. I also wanted to paint this section where the license plate goes black. One of the cool things about this kit is the separate Cobra emblems and the other really nice looking chrome parts. I used some micro crystal clear glue to secure each of the mirrors to the side view mirror housings. This glue dries clear so I don't have to worry about any excess. I wasn't going to do much with the headlights, but I did use a little amber paint for the turn signals. For the fog lights, I used silver paint. The Cobra emblems looked very nice, however they are super bright chrome as you can see. I wanted to make them look just a little nicer. I started by using a fine point Sharpie marker on the rear emblem, although as you'll see in just a moment, there's a decal for the rear emblem, so this isn't necessary. To dull the chrome on the emblems, to make them look just a little more like the real thing, I brushed on some Tamiya smoke. It's very subtle and hard to see the difference on camera, but I think they look much better. The taillights would be a little tricky to mask off, so I hand painted them silver. The taillight lenses need to be painted red with 2 white lines on each. I first painted the white lines using white paint, and then painted over the top of that with transparent red. Here's a look at the decal that's for the rear emblem. Again, you really don't need to paint the rear emblem since there's a decal for it. I glued the rear view mirror to that visor piece and then painted everything but the mirror black. These side marker lights are separate pieces that I painted transparent orange. So at this point, the body is very close to being completed. There's a ton of little details and small parts that needed to be painted, but the car is really coming together nicely, and I love the attention to detail on this kit. I think Revell did a great job with it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it all together. I hope all of you are looking forward to seeing it together as well. Part 3, which is the final part of this build series, will go live next week on Friday the 24th at 4 p.m. Eastern. Of course, if you don't want to wait that long, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the button below, or becoming a member on Patreon with a link in the description to see the full build. Your support is greatly appreciated and helps make more content like this possible. Plus, you'll get access to some additional perks as well. Before I end this video, I want to showcase some of the awesome vehicles and projects that have been showcased over on the Make It RC Facebook group. The link, as always, is below in the description. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hello everyone, welcome to the third and final part of the 1/25th scale RC 2010 Ford Shelby GT500 build. Last week I wired all of the electronics and painted the car. In today's video I'll be completing the assembly of the car as well as doing some driving. If you're new to this build series, I recommend you take a look at the playlist linked below in the description and start from the beginning. You'll learn more about this project and the products used. For everyone else, this project should need no further introduction, as I'm sure you've been following along, knowing all the ins and outs by now, and hopefully are as excited as I am to see this car up and running. So with that said, let's get started. First, let's take a look at all the parts that I'll be installing. Like I said in the last video, I love all the detail that this kit has, and about all that's left to do is glue each of these parts to the body. I started by gluing each window into place using micro crystal clear glue. This glue dries clear, so I don't have to worry about a little excess. Once the glue dries, the windows look great. While I had the glue out, I used it again to secure the taillight lenses. I also secured the side view mirrors, doing my best to make each side symmetrical. Making sure not to sneeze, I glued each side marker lens to the body. Next, I carefully installed each fog light lens. The headlights were a little tricky to install, but looked great once they were in place. I continued by gluing the sun visors and rear emblem. Here I'm applying the license plate decal to the rear bumper. These Cobra emblems were a little bit of a pain to glue, but looked really nice on the car. I again used glue that would dry clear since I needed to move them around a little to have them positioned correctly. The grills and hood vents went on next. At this point, the body was complete and really turned out nice. I did still want to add a few details to the interior, starting with the instrument panel and seat decals. Revell did a great job of including a bunch of decals, including all of the little controls for the steering wheel. Once I had the decals on, I glued the steering wheel and turn signal lever to the column. It's not a super detailed interior, but it's a nice addition to the car. Once the interior was complete, I glued it to the body. Next, I removed the temporary wheels that I had on the chassis and assembled the final wheels I'm using for this car. The finished wheels turned out looking great. I really like the chrome outer rim with the black center. Finally, I glued each tailpipe piece into place. Here's a look at the finished car. I'm extremely happy with how this car turned out, and I think it will prove to be a great balance of scale realism, but also easy to work on and modify. I especially like the dark blue color and white stripes. Of course, the only thing left to do now is some driving. The car drives great, though doesn't have a very high top speed with the 2000 RPM N20 motor that's installed currently. The car handles well and drives very smoothly with no wheel rub, an all-around really fun car to drive. Where the slower speed N20 motor is really fun is going around a tight autocross track like what I set up here. The challenge of navigating through all of the cones as fast as possible is a lot of fun, and makes it more about fast response and maneuvering rather than maximum speed. There really isn't much more I have to say. It's an all-around great car that is a lot of fun to drive. Of course, if you'd like to build your own car like what I've shown in this series, you'll find many of the parts I used available on our online store, and the STL files available on Patreon. As always, links to both are below in the description. This fully FDM 3D printable FFR SC1 chassis I used is being sized to fit other popular model car kits, so be on the lookout for those, as well as some more builds on this channel utilizing this FFR SC1 variant. To conclude this video, I'm going to showcase some of the awesome vehicles and projects that have been showcased over on the Make It RC Facebook group. That's all for this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and stay tuned for some more content like this coming soon.